Varanguard. Why are these so expensive? I mean, there's 3 models, 70 quid. No, this is too much money. I have 6 of them. 3 of them are proxies. This should be the last bit of armor that we've got to do that is not on a named character. So let's get to it after this. Hi everybody, welcome back. I'm Wayne. Thanks for joining me again. If you're new here, hello. If you're not new, welcome back. Thank you for tolerating me and listening to me as I go through this hobby journey. It's appreciated. Let's talk about the Varanguard, these massively expensive models that I don't understand why they cost so much money, but they do. We have 6 of them, 2 units of 3. We want to get those in our army. These are the last ones that are the knight kind of aesthetic that aren't named characters, as I said in the intro. So we want to do these very well painted, I think. A little bit above what we did with the previous cavalry. These are more in line with the Chosen, so we're going to go in that direction with terms of the colours. If you've not seen the previous videos in the series, have a look up there, playlist. Check out the first episode certainly so you can see the colour palette we're going for, the inspiration behind what the theme is, and how it's going to interact with the bases. Okay, that said, let's crack on and see what we can do with these guys. We're going to build on what we did with the Chosen. Now, I'm going to start from there. So by this point, you will have taken that warm grey that we've used previously and dry brushed the elements of the models, the horse's skin, flesh with that. Is it an horse? I'm not even sure it is. And we're also going to have used that dark gunmetal, and then we're going to come in with the brass over the top of it to pick out the details on the demonic horse's trim and the Varanguard's trim. Okay, once we've done that, we're in a good position. We can start now. So what we're going to do in the first instance, as I say, is we're going to take that foundation that we've already established and we're going to iterate on it somewhat. And exactly as we did with the Chosen, I'm going to come in with some thinned down contrast black paint. It doesn't matter what kind of black paint you use here. It doesn't necessarily have to be contrast. It could be black ink. And we're going to use that to re-establish the black armor panels. Now, this is totally different to the Chaos Knights and the Chaos Warriors. And this is something that we want to have on the more elite units, as we've seen with the Chosen. This is going to help that baroque trim stand out a little bit more. It's going to take a little while. So bang on a podcast, get some music on or whatever it is you do just to hammer through these and work your way around the model, making sure not to miss any of the smaller armor panels. You could do it the other way around, but I strongly suggest you do it this way. It was way faster for me. And it does already look kind of cool. We've definitely seen progress just doing this one simple step, and it's adding a point of differentiation from our Chaos Knights. Okay, right, this is the foundation pretty much done. Let's crack on. We're going to use that spot color of blue that we've used in the previous painting tutorials, and we're going to use a little bit more of it in this one. In fact, we're going to paint the entire demonic horse in the blue. Now, you can glaze this on. That's what I've chosen to do. I don't want it to be too vibrant, but I do want it to be certainly seen on the model. I've chosen to do the blue on all of the demonic horses, on all 3 of the riders, to tie the unit together. I did consider using a different colour for each of the horses to tie them to each of the representative chaos gods that I thought they most aligned to. This guy looking more cornate, but I decided to bring that into the armour of the specific rider and have a unifying colour that was existing across the unit. And using this blue is going to give me that look that I wanted without introducing another colour to our scheme and just adding a little bit more confusion. So we've got the consistency there. We're not adding anything new. We're just using it in a much larger way than we have previously. And we are going to still close this onto the shield. So again, we have consistency there. Okay, so this is going to take you a little bit of time. Remembering it's much easier to add more paint than it is to take it away. So go lightly, work in thin coats, and get to a vibrancy that works for you and your scheme. Another simple step then, and one that we've used in a couple of places in previous tutorials, I'm going to come in with some Skeleton Horde, and this is basically slapjob at this point. Let's not put any hairs and graces around it. This is very, very simple stuff, but we are going to build on top of it. Using Skeleton Horde or something like that, I decided that that's what I was going to give as a contrasting tone to all of the bone elements of these demonic horse things, whatever they're supposed to be. This is just going to darken it down a little bit. It's going to go over the highlights that we established with that warm grey, and it gives us something that's tonally in the same range of what we're looking for without bringing too much interest to it. We don't want to pick out every single little detail because there's a lot you could potentially pick out on these models, and that's one of the problems with them. They're very busy. So I'm going muted with it with these. I want to keep the emphasis on the elements that I want to keep in focus of the viewer, and that is the riders and the OSL that's going to tie this entire thing together while having some type of visual difference between the specific units. And coming into the next step, we're going to come in with some snakebite leather. This is a little bit warmer than the other colours we've used and will contrast nicely with the cool blue that we've got, but it's still dull enough that it's going to read as the same sort of desaturated palette that we wanted, while just bringing a little bit more visual interest to elements of the demonic horsey thing, whatever. I really do need to learn what to call these things. Right, work your way around the model. There shouldn't be much on this. It's mostly around the hoofs and a little bit on the underbelly on some of them. Work slowly, work methodically. You can always add more if you need to. Next, I'm going to bust out the contrast wildwood, or a really dark brown. I absolutely adore this colour. It's so versatile, so many things. I'm going to use it on all of the cloth elements and on the saddle and a couple of bits of the leather strapping that I just want to be a little bit darker. Because we've used that snakebite leather on the horse's hair, having something that gives a little bit more contrast and a little bit to differentiate between the elements is useful without going too far into picking out every single little thing. Thinking back to earlier videos, this is really helping to re-establish those lessons that we talked about around creating contrast between the dark and the light, and that's what's going to sell the effect later on. Thinking about how this is going to work in conjunction with our basing themes and that pink glow that we're going to introduce further on. So having that end goal in mind and understanding why you're doing each of the steps and not getting caught up on painting each individual detail is really key to making this overall theme work and keeping it efficient. And that is the main goal here, to have it look good but be efficient. We're not going for competition quality. And the eagle-eyed demonu will have noticed that I've missed a couple of panels out when I did the original black colour that I came back in with earlier. So if you look on his back there, I'd missed that. I do come back and I fix that later on. So again, just take your time as you're doing that step. You don't want to miss anything out, and it just makes it a little bit easier. We won't spend too much time on this step, but what we're going to do is we're going to come in with some white ink and start to put in the foundations of where we want our glows to appear later on down the line. So I'm going to pick out the eyes, these weird metal things that are covering the eyes of this particular chap and his weird demonic horse, getting some white ink in there that's going to establish the hotspots later on. I'm also going to pick out a couple of the cracks in the armor and just wherever it is that I'm going to have glowing further down the line. And you want to do that on the horse as well, the demonic horse, I'm sorry. Just pick them out where you are going to have that glow effect. Don't go too mad here. You don't want it to be an entire glowy thing. You just want to pick out some nice areas of detail where you do want to draw the viewer's eyes. Remember, this is definitely one of those cases of less is more. One of the things that I wanted to do with the Chosen, and to some extent with these guys, is to show, even though they are Chaos Undivided, have an alignment, a leaning towards certain gods. Perhaps they're starting to have doubts about the undivided aspect and they are going certain ways. So I wanted to bring in a little bit of colour representative of each of the Chaos gods. And I wanted to do that kind of based on how their armour looked. So what I'm going to do is, exactly as we did with the Chosen, I'm going to stipple very lightly with that warm grey into the middle of the armour panels of only the riders. And I'm using a small round brush to do this. I would recommend you use a round brush to do it. It really helps kind of get in there and it just gives a nicer texture. And what we are doing is trying to build up a texture and a light point towards the volume of the armor. So working with the curve, not going into the recesses. And I'm working very lightly, making sure the tip of my brush was moist so that the paint transfer is nice and smooth. And you want to do this, as I say, to each of the armor panels, and this is going to act as the underpaint that we'll then layer on top and ink to glaze a color on it. So when the light hits it, it will read as a certain color, and that will give us almost a hint that they're going towards a specific chaos god. And again, it just adds another point of separation from their eliteness in the army, something of visual interest to take away from what is otherwise just quite a boring aesthetic for Slaves to Darkness. I think even though I've tried to bring something to the color scheme myself with the OSL and shy away from the usual look and feel, it can feel quite samey and quite overwhelming. So having these elite units work in this way will then let us free up the undivided element towards the command units, the very elite, the ones that have managed to separate all of the Chaos Gods out and unify them. Whereas these, they've not quite made it there yet. That's the idea behind it anyway. Right, let's crack on with it then. At this point now, we're almost there with this. So using that previous step, we're going to then glaze on a color of our choice. I'm going to use red here because this one is, in my head, cornet. It just has that feeling for me. So I'm going to use some red ink. You could use some red contrast paint. I would strongly recommend thinning it down. Either way, they can be quite strong. And I'm just going to carefully glaze on the red ink over the armor panels. And that's going to give us that inkling, a flavor of color. Now, you can add more. So again, work in layers and try not to rip the paint. So let one layer dry before you go in with another one. And yeah, just attack all of those armor panels that you've added that buffed highlight to that stippled texture in the previous step. At this point, you're pretty much done. The only thing we've got left to do is to add the OSL, and we've already covered that multiple times in this tutorial series, so I won't cover it again here. If you've not, I would strongly recommend you go back and you check out some of the previous videos in this playlist, or there'll be a link up in the top corner right now. I'm just going to add the last few little details, a couple of little highlights here and there from the OSL, and of course, that underlighting that we'll have emitted from the base. You can see it there on the demonic horse's leg, just where that's going to shine up from underneath and give us again a little bit more of the separation in terms of the tone and tie it all together as one. Adding a few bright spots here and there around where the OSL is, just to sell that effect of it being hotter, brighter, more high contrast against the darker armor. I think you'll see now that we've got the pink on there that you actually can't see the red as vibrant as you did previously. Because the pink is much brighter than anything else around it, everything else effectively becomes dulled down, so the emphasis is taken away from the redness of the armor panels. If you wanted as well, you could do some recess shading around the armor panels as well to make those stand out a little bit more and make them a little bit less red. If you wanted to do that, you don't have to. I've not. I quite like how this looks. And all that remains to be done is have a look at how they all ended up. I'm so glad that these models are done. I can see why people like them. However, for me, they're just overly fussy. That's not to say that I don't like detail, I really do, but these, I don't know, they seem over-engineered and overdeveloped, but whatever. That is something for another video. In terms of how they look, I'm happy with them. These do exactly as we want them to do. They look different enough, they look elite. I like that. I don't think I'll be adding any more at this price. I don't even think I'll be getting any more proxies of them, to be absolutely honest. Let's see how they perform on the tabletop. I think this is all of the night kind of elements done now, so we should be done. Fine, we'll move on to other stuff now. Named characters, I think, soon. But we've got 2 other things to do before we get to those. Join me for the next one, and you'll see what that is. See ya.